There we go. All right. Hello, everyone.
Woo!
And when I say everyone, I mean no one, because nobody's watching right now, but
Hey,
somebody
they're
will
going
be.
to. They're going to.
That's that's the goal. Hey, Joel, let me ask you this: are you getting any echo in your headphones from me?
I'm getting nothing but joy, bro. That's all I'm getting
Nothing
right
but
now.
joy. Awesome.
Nothing but
Hey, look, we
joy.
got we got 3 people watching.
Yeah.
That's
All right. Hey guys,
that's
welcome.
awesome. Hey, for those of you guys watching, my name's Aaron Salvato. This is my buddy Joel Turner.
And I'm Joel Turner. Good to be with you guys.
We are very glad to be here with you. Yeah, today we're doing an online workshop for the CGN conference. Joel, why couldn't you come out? Why couldn't you be here?
You know what? Just infighting again. I don't want to start rumors, but just personal issues again. Same as last year. Every year there's something.
Yeah, dude. So
Yeah.
much infighting. Just, wow. It's tragic.
You know someone's
Well,
writing that down right now. No.
I'm glad you're here at last. Hey, you know what? My buddy Zach Peck from New Jersey is watching,
Woo! Hey
and
Zach,
he's
how
a
you doing,
youth
man?
pastor.
All
He's a
right.
youth pastor.
That's great.
A great youth pastor. And so he is literally the target audience of this workshop. I'm excited that he's here. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Zach. This is great.
Yep. So we got New Jersey, we got Canada where I am. You're in the States right now in LA, I'm guessing, right at main base.
Yep. Not LA,
Your
but
house.
Orange County, you know.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. We're all over.
Yep. Well, yeah. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about, and maybe Joel, you and I can talk about this together a little bit before I go into my workshop portion of this.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we're going to be talking about doubt and deconstruction. And this isn't going to be a sermon because the target audience of this is leaders. And so what we realize is, I mean, I don't know about you, Joel, but for me, as a former youth pastor, I am watching in this cultural moment so many young people that I shepherded, walked with, counseled, baptized, went on mission trips with. I'm seeing so many people struggling in this cultural moment. And some people, not all, but there's some that are really struggling with this whole deconstruction thing, which we'll get into and talk more about what that is. But yeah, Joel, how about you? What's your experience been?
Yeah, massive. I run a kind of larger scale outreach event which targets 18 to 35 called Gravity up here in Canada. And the last one we did was on deconstruction because just really felt burdened by the constant, not only what we see on YouTube, what we see online, but just stories and people sort of saying, I'm ditching out on faith. And if we care about what we're doing and who we are and about Jesus and his effect on the nations, then we should care about this because it's sort of rampant right now. So it irked me to the place where I was like, God, we're gonna fast and pray as a team and go before you and ask the Holy Spirit to just lead us into a response to this as a ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I don't know. I would want to take a minute to address kind of what deconstruction is, because some people
Sure.
hear that and they're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, great. Let's do it.
Joel, I'm getting a little bit of echo from your end of things, so you might need to turn down your volume a little bit.
I've got it. It's down. Is that better?
Yeah, I think so. Let me say something first. Yep, that's good.
All right.
Okay, perfect. So deconstruction, what is that? This is kind of how I would describe it. Deconstruction, just like as a preface, it's something that starts in like French philosophy, but nobody's really thinking about that. That's like the roots of it. So I just want to get really practical and not go through like the long history of deconstruction. There's plenty of TED Talks and things that you can find about that. But just practically for ministry's sake, the deconstruction movement right now is something happening on social media. And we're seeing tons of Christians, former Christians, who are now either in the process of struggling with their faith or people who have left it completely, who are posting critical things about the church, negative things about the church, some things true, some things false, pointing that stuff out, hashtag deconstruction, deconstructionist, ex-evangelical. So that's like a clever term that means I was formerly an evangelical Christian. Now I'm an ex-evangelical, either Christian or just not at all anymore a part of that. And so like for me, and I'd want to know what you think, Joel, but for me, what I'm seeing is a lot of young people that grew up in the church, like me, pastor's kid, private Christian school, all of that good stuff. And now there's this struggle where it's like, I was hurt in my church. I was abused in my church. Somebody wounded me emotionally, maybe even like many people, like sexual abuse, right? That's a big thing right now that's happening. We're seeing in the SBC. And so people who have experienced trauma in the church and struggles in the church and people who have experienced leaders in the church letting them down, hurting them, wounding them, now the way that they're processing it is to go, I saw corruption, I saw bad things, and so therefore, how could Christianity actually be true? How could the gospel actually be true? If Christians are this bad, if Christians are treating us this horribly, how could the gospel even make sense? And so then you start to pick apart at things and pull on threads, and before you know it, your faith has been deconstructed, and then you move on to either atheism, agnosticism, Christian Buddhism, right? Like that's a whole nother thing where it's just kind of spirituality, but there's no actual Jesus, like there, at least the scriptural gospel-based Jesus attached to it. So what would you say, Joel?
Well, I mean, bang on. Love how you sort of defined it. Love how you've kind of zoned in on this is the historical, in a sense, context, but also the personal. I think it's very hard in people's minds sometimes to separate their experiences or experientiality, if you will, from, truths or doctrines, and to not have them all mixed up and sort of throw out the baby with the bathwater. So when I think in terms of deconstructionism, I picture a house, and I think it's like, everybody, if you will, in their faith journey, if we can say that, whether they're saved or not, just their experience from growing up has formed a faith house. Now, I'm not trying to be weird or sound like I'm emergent or have gone some weird direction. I'm just saying, if you want to say that each person, saved or not, because everybody has a faith, whether their faith is in God or something else. People say, well, my God wouldn't do that. Well, that's a false God. That's not, when they're defining that, it's still faith. You have to believe, in something other than God. But the point is, I look at it like a house that's sort of being constructed and it's built up. And so if you cross that line of faith and you have this walk with the Lord Jesus, this is your spiritual house. If you don't, you still have a house. And then what happens is a lot of people like, oh, I grew up with like the scenery around me. My parents were Christian, these different things that make them say, well, I have a Christian faith. Because I'm not even saying they're saved, all of them. I'm just dealing with the fact that everyone has this house constructed. And then I think you've built that. And now deconstructing faith, from what I've read and studied and looked at and listened to people and individuals, is now you're taking the furniture out of that house. You're kind of moving it out to the front of the street, and you're evaluating, like, this couch that's always been there, is that really what I want in my house? And what a lot of people are doing, because I see the massive trend, is that people start, deconstructing, and then they depart. They go, I don't want the furniture. I don't want this. And now they've got this house that's empty of Christian components. And that's not really even dealing with whether they're saved or not, because I can't know their heart. I know what it is to be saved, and we're not universalists, but I can't say whether they are saved. That's just what I hear process.
And I would add, that was great. I would add, I think that, and I've met people like this, there's different stages of deconstruction. There's people who it's like, oh my gosh, I was wounded. I was hurt by my church. The theology I grew up with, like think about somebody, I saw a TED Talk by the daughter of one of the high-ranking members of the Westboro Baptist Church. So that's a Christian church that is also like, it's a cult, right?
Yeah,
it's extremely like racist and hateful, and they're going around protesting, the deaths of soldiers and saying God hates gay people and all this stuff. And so, she does this TED Talk, and she talks about how through meeting secular atheist people on Twitter, she ended up, because her whole life she heard that secular atheist people were like horrible, mean, cruel, and then she met some, and they're like, oh my gosh, these people are nicer than my family. So like that was her deconstruction. And for her, I'm glad she deconstructed because she saw, oh my gosh, I grew up with all these hateful things that were presented as this is the gospel. And so she deconstructed
Is she the one,
that.
Aaron? Sorry, just to interject.
Yeah.
Is she the one that actually came back around to real faith? Because I know one of those from Westboro. Okay.
I don't know. I think she might have ended up agnostic.
There was a girl who came out of it, became atheistic, and then found Jesus.
Curly hair, maybe.
I don't put a lot of emphasis on hair. I'm not sure why, but it's just not important to me.
Well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out afterwards. But I think at the time I saw that TED Talk, I think where she was agnostic. And basically what I was kind of gearing up to say was there can be a healthy sense of it where if you grew up in a church with really bad theology and doctrine that was not biblical, you need to deconstruct that. You need to remove that. But what so many do, and I've seen this over and over, and even some of my friends, unfortunately, is you deconstruct, but there's no reconstruction. It's pull everything down, but what about rebuilding? What about, okay, I had bad theology. What's the good theology? What can I replace it with to build back up? But I do know some people in various stages of this where they have deconstructed a lot of their faith, but they're still clinging on to Jesus. And it's those people that I'm really praying for, that God would break through and kind of show them what real Christianity is. And he wants to use all of us to do that. So now this is a good introduction. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get into kind of a lesson portion of this. And this is not me preaching to you, the audience. This is more me as a fellow minister in Christ, as somebody who has served young people for years and is still serving young people, talking through what is this experience and how does God respond to those who doubt and who deconstruct. And I think that we can learn a lot from some biblical stories. So Joel, I'm going to pop you off and go into the lesson part, and then I'll bring you back on. I might actually, maybe when I get to the midway point, I might bring you on for some discussion before I come back and finish it. So, but Joel will be here in spirit behind the scenes. So thanks for being here, Joel. Okay, so before I get into the lesson part of this, I just want to throw up, I run a ministry called Good Lion Ministries. Some of you guys here might have listened to the Good Lion podcast. Me and a former youth pastor, Brian Higgins, we talk a lot about this stuff. We love young people. We want to see young people follow Jesus. Huge part of our ministry is about helping people specifically address this. So you can go to goodlion.org and you can find podcasts and all kinds of things that reference this and help people walk through this. So I am going to pull open my slides, and here we go. Add those. Great. So here's the title of my message or of my class, Beyond the Shadow of a Doubt. And I think that doubt, it's what I refer to as the evil twin brother of faith, because oftentimes they're right next to each other, and you have someone with really clear faith, but there's also doubt hanging around them. And you know, what better character than Doubting Thomas, right, for us to look into. So I want to define doubt for us. Doubt can be defined as the feeling of uncertainty or a lack of conviction. And that is something that is not fun to have at church, right? Like if you're a Christian, if you're trying to walk with Jesus, but you have doubt about Christianity, it's not fun, because so often we believe this idea that good Christians don't doubt. Good Christians don't have any doubts. They just have really strong faith and they believe. And this is kind of the message we can project sometimes from the pulpit or from our small groups or from our youth ministries. It's just, you got to have faith, brother. But what about the people sitting in our chairs who struggle with doubt? And doubters can be looked down upon. And the reason I titled it this message, it's that play on words, beyond the shadow of doubt. I think that so many people, their doubt as they're trying to walk with Christ, it's casting this shadow, this long shadow over them. It's kind of like when you're walking around and your shadow follows you, right? You can't get away from it. There's so many people who are in our churches, they're struggling with doubt, and it's following them around like a shadow. Many hide their doubts and they don't ask questions. And I get that, because nobody likes to be the person, raising their hand in class saying, hey, I don't get it. Can you explain it to me? No one wants to seem foolish. But what we're seeing over and over again is young people in the church, in the Christian bubble, growing up in that environment, but they have doubts and they have discouragements and they have things that they're starting to deconstruct, but they don't feel like they can talk to anyone about it. And so what happens is they go through that experience. They feel like there's nobody they can share with. There's no one they can find any hope or relief from their struggle. And then they end up going off to college and, they go to some secular school, which I've got nothing against going to secular colleges, but they get into an environment that's different than their Christian bubble. And it's an environment which primarily is run by people who think Christianity is nonsense. And what happens is their faith just starts to dissolve because all of those doubts were just threads waiting to be pulled, right? And so the whole thing unravels. And I just think personally, from the bottom of my heart, I think that Jesus wants his church to be a place where we can be open and honest with our doubts and with our struggles. I truly think he wants us to move beyond the shadow of a doubt. So I'm going to introduce you guys. Well, not introduce you. Like, you all know the story of Thomas, right? Doubting Thomas. I'm going to just get into it. And you probably know the story like the back of your hand, but it's got so much relevance to this. So just bear with me. So to set up the story of doubting Thomas, what do we got? We got Jesus on the cross, right? And we have the disciples going through the dark night of the soul as their Lord and their master hangs on the cross. It's like, this is everything we've been working for, everything we've been building towards. Jesus, this amazing, miraculous carpenter with these amazing teachers who teaches with authority, who does miracles, who said he was the Son of God, and now he's hanging on the cross. And you better believe those disciples were going through some serious doubt in that moment. Just hardcore doubt and discouragement in that moment. And then what happens? We know the story, right? The women go to the tomb and they see the risen Jesus, and they come back and tell the disciples, and they're just like, wait, what? Like they're doubting. They're like, I don't understand how that could be possible. The Jesus who was just brutally murdered in front of me, alive. There's doubt. And so then we have in John chapter 20, verse 19, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the door locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And he said, and after he said this, he showed them the hands and his side where the holes that Jesus pierced were. And the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said, "Peace be with you." And the Father, he sent me and I'm sending you. And he breathes on them and he says, "Receive the Holy Spirit." This is this amazing moment for the disciples because it just catapults them from this place of catastrophic doubt to this place of just soaring faith. But consider this, somebody was left out of the experience, and that's doubting Thomas. So in John 20, verse 24, now Thomas, one of the 12, he wasn't with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he says to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." I find that so relatable. I mean, so many of us, even those of us who've been in ministry for a long time, we've had experiences where someone in our life, a friend, has gone through this amazing experience, this spiritual experience where it's like, I saw God heal somebody, God answered my prayer. And you're sitting there and you're like, what about me? Like, what about me? Like, I don't feel that. I don't get that. I've actually had moments I can remember talking to students in my own youth group where we were up at a camp and it's like cry night and everybody's just weeping and just like, oh, the Lord is giving me this amazing word and I'm convicted of my sin and I'm moved by the Spirit and the tears are flowing. And I remember specific moments sitting next to kids and they're just looking at me like, Pastor Aaron, like, that's great for them, but like, I don't feel anything. I feel like dead inside. Like, what's wrong with me? I love Jesus, but I'm not feeling what they feel. I can't see what they see. And, for me personally, like, I feel really lucky because I've had so many experiences in my life where I can look at them and point to them in remembrance and just be like, that was the Lord. Like, I can't deny that wasn't the Lord. Like, it would be stupid to believe that wasn't the Lord. So for me, it's like I have a lot of faith because I've seen a lot of things and I've been through a lot of things I can point to. But I have friends who are like, I've never experienced any of that. My faith has always just been A pastor tells me stuff. I read stuff in the Bible. I do a little bit of research on the historicity of the Bible and the scientific, all the apologetic stuff that we learn, right? But like, that's what their faith hangs on. And that's hard. It's hard to be that person, right? We can think, why? Like, I think there's so many people in our youth groups, in our churches, who haven't had these amazing experiences of God. And they think, why not me? Doesn't he love me? And I think this is what Thomas is experiencing, being left out and struggling to believe. And I think in this moment, it's important for us to ask, how does Jesus respond to doubters? How does Jesus respond? What is his response? Doubt can often produce this deep-seated shame and frustration about our doubts. And oftentimes, many people, their experience in the church as they doubt is they hear people say, hey, just get your act together. Like, why are you doubting? Just get your act together. Just tough it up and believe, right? And that's why I think this story, for those of us in leadership, this story is so informative and it's so beautiful and it's so helpful as we learn how to walk with people through their doubts, through their discouragements. So I'm going to go again to the text, John chapter 20, verse 26. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. And though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. He literally walks through the walls, right? He just like comes through the bookshelf. He blows their mind. And then he goes over to Thomas and he says to Thomas, Thomas, here I am. Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe. And Thomas is just blown away. And he's like, my Lord, my God, I can't believe this. This is just like, Jesus, you're here and you've proven yourself to me. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Thomas. You've seen me and you believe, but blessed are those who have not seen and believe. And I love this story. I love this story because it's so informative about how Jesus responds to doubters. How does he respond in the story? I mean, we could just go back and repeat verse 27, right? The latter part of it. We could just look at it and say, right there, Jesus says, just stop your doubting and believe, Thomas. But listen, it's not just about what Jesus said. Don't divorce his words from his actions. He doesn't just say, stop your doubting and believe. What does he do? No, he shows up. He doesn't burst through the walls like the Kool-Aid man, just like, hey, Thomas, what's wrong with you, bro? No, he comes in gently. He's like, Thomas, I'm here. I'm here. Look at the holes. Look at my side. Look at my hands. I'm here. Stop your doubting and believe. It's not this heart of anger. It's this heart of gentleness and love. I think it's beautiful. Look at this concept of doubt is often this obstacle to relationship. Doubt is often a wall. If I say to my wife, I love you, and she responds, I doubt it, that means that there's something broken in the relationship. Jesus looks at Thomas. He sees this wall between them, and he says, I will tear down this wall. I will tear down what separates us. Thomas, he has this nickname, right? Doubting Thomas. Is that the nickname Jesus gave him? No, that's the nickname that we, the church, much later on gave Thomas. And if Joel or I had, the church globally, if they were privy to our mistakes, I wonder what our nicknames would be, right? That's what I'm wondering. And Thomas is often compared to Judas. Like, we have the villains of the disciples, right? There's Judas, the traitor, and Thomas, the doubter. But think about the other disciples. Like, what do we know about them? Peter doubted hardcore. Peter denied Christ in the garden 3 times. That was majorly a moment of doubt. Peter was walking on water and he sank. Majorly a moment of doubt. All of the disciples go through these incredible moments of doubt. And I think this story being included is a beautiful acknowledgement that followers of Jesus can and do doubt, and he's big enough to handle it. He's big enough to handle it. I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that. Now, I want to point out for those of us who do ministry, some examples of doubt, just that like our young people in our churches struggle with. Here's some prime examples. I'll never find love. I doubt that God can provide for me someone to live my life with. or acceptance among my family or my peers? If God is good, why do we suffer? God can't help me in my trial. Why is sin such a big deal, right? That's a big one. Like, I know what the scripture says, but like, why is it such a big deal? I kind of doubt that what God says there is true. Or if God is loving, why do so many people go to hell? Or why is this happening to me? I've been a good person. Or, a big one that I've struggled with in my life is, I've sinned. I've sinned so much in my life. I doubt that God could actually forgive me. These are doubts that our young people face. It's this universal struggle. And, honestly, personally, I don't know one person that I look up to in the faith who has never doubted. I love what Chesterton says, G.K. Chesterton. He says, it is materialists and madmen who never have doubts. I think we need to acknowledge this with our young people. To be like, hey, this is normal. Like, doubting it's extremely human, right? Extremely human. And, I think some of you guys watching this, you potentially could have a legalistic bent. Maybe you are kind of like the older brother in the prodigal son parable. And maybe you like look at your friends or look at your former students, some of you guys as youth pastors, and you just think, I just don't get it. Like, ever since I became a Christian, I've never doubted. Like, I've always trusted God. Like, why is it so hard? Like, why can't they just get their act together? Why do they have all these doubts and questions? Like, they just need to trust God and just trust that he's sovereign and trust he has everything in control and just stop asking questions. And, you can have that older brother mentality, right? Like, what was his problem? The older brother in the story, he was like, why did my younger brother doubt the father? Why did he run away from home? I don't understand. I've always been here. I've always done the right thing. And maybe that's your struggle. Well, if you've never struggled with doubt, honestly, like, I don't think you're thinking, just no offense, but I don't think you're thinking that hard about theological issues. Because, like, for me, the more I've studied theology, the more I've learned about all of the differences between the denominations and just the differences of what throughout church history people believe and what they fought about and just all of these things. Like, it's overwhelming. Like, for me, even as a pastor, like, it's produced some doubt and discouragement where I'm like, whoa, when I was a kid and all I had was the flannel graph and the Veggie Tales, like, Christianity seemed really simplistic. And as I get older, I'm like, whoa, it's actually kind of complicated. It's easy to say doubters are weak. Like, it's easy for those of us who don't struggle as much. It's easy for us to be in that position where we're just like, oh, doubters, they're weak. And we can think of it almost like in the way that faith healers think about things. Like, what do faith healers teach? It's like, hey, I'm going to heal you. And then if they try to do their mystical healing thing and somebody doesn't get healed, it's like, oh, well, you just didn't have enough faith. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You just didn't believe enough. I just think we need to avoid that because it pushes people away. We need to help people to realize that doubting is actually a normal part of the faith experience. It's not the existence of doubt that's the problem. It's what do you do with the doubt, right? It's not the existence of doubt. It's what you do with it. Let's just go to scripture, right? Let's just go to the Hall of Faith. The Hall of Faith. All these legendary Bible characters that we learned about in Sunday school. And it's like, oh, these are the ones. And we got to, they're the ones that put their trust in the Lord and did great things, right? I'll read off some. Noah, by faith, built an ark, saved the human race. No big deal. Abraham, by faith, was willing to offer his son as a sacrifice. Sarah, by faith, had a son in old age. Jacob, by faith, blessed his grandsons. Moses, by faith, left a life of royalty to lead God's people to freedom. Rahab, by faith, protected Joshua and Caleb from the enemies of God. Gideon, by faith, defeated an entire army with no weapons. Barak, by faith, led troops into battle. Samson, by faith, defeated the Philistines. And David, by faith, defeated the giant Goliath and became the great king of Israel, right? So these are the Hall of Faith. And we look at these people and we say, oh, yes, of course, they trusted God. And if I just trust God, my life will be okay. But then, all these young people, they're listening to these Bible stories, and sometimes we can preach them in a moralistic way. And what it leads to is just people going, I can't measure up. I don't have the faith that these people have. Like, I bet they never doubt. Like, I can't do that. I can't be this great hero of faith. Well, here's what we need to point people to. The reality is, as you go through the story of the Bible, all these people in the hall of faith, there's actually there's another side of the coin to this. And it's, for me, what I call the hall of doubt. This is the other side of the coin. Noah, by doubt, gets wasted and stumbles his entire family. Abraham, by doubt, gave his wife away to other men. Sarah, by doubt, laughs at God when he says, you're going to have a child, and has Abraham sleep with the maid because she doesn't believe that she can actually get pregnant. Jacob, by doubt, steals his brother's birthright. Moses, by doubt, lashes out in anger and kills a man. Rahab, by doubt, lived life as a prostitute. Gideon, by doubt, hid from his enemies. Barak, by faith, was a coward. Samson, by faith, sacrifices his strength and calling for sex. And David, by doubt, committed many adultery and many murders. And this, for me, this is what I say to young people. I'm like, hey, guys, do you get this? Do you understand? This is remarkable. The people listed in that hall of faith, they all doubted. They all struggled with their moments of doubt. Well, then why were they let in the hall of faith? It's because it's this beautiful picture of one of the main themes of the story of the Bible. And that is, despite humans' constant failures, they're made righteous by God's efforts, not their own, God's efforts. And he uses them despite their weakness. He works through them despite their doubt. And as we as humans doubt, trust, there's this duality where it's like we can doubt, and yet we can also trust the Lord. And, you know, it's like that classic phrase from Scripture, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief, right? Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. I'm going to take a moment to see if we can get Joel back in. I just want to discuss what we've talked about so far. So I'm not sure if he's here. I think he was possibly having trouble with his camera, but let me see if I can get him back in. Joel, are you here?
Man, I'm here. For some reason, I just got a message from the software saying my camera's not working. I have no idea why.
We're just going to talk to you in the void, you know?
Yeah,
that's okay. Can Joel keep talking? I just want to see if we can still hear you.
I'm re-plugging in here. Maybe there's a glitch in the system. Can you hear me though?
I can hear you. So why don't we just treat this like a phone call podcast thing?
Let's do it, because maybe for someone, seeing me would not be good for their faith.
Maybe it's just triggering, and the minute they see you, it's like, oh man, if I'm going to end up like that guy, I don't know if I want to be.
I don't need to see that, right?
Right. Yeah, there you go.
I'll try to get it fixed.
Well, yeah, just I don't know if you were able to listen while I was teaching, because I know you were trying to fix your camera and stuff.
Am I back? Am I back?
Oh, yeah. Here we go. Hold on.
I was listening to your teaching. Hey, everybody.
Bam.
I was listening to your teaching and I loved it. And I wanted to ask you and just kind of chat about a few things. The first one is, well, just a comment, like doubt is such a massive part of this, isn't it? And I thought that was really good that you reference Thomas as a character. And it kind of made me think of other people, as you kind of listed a bunch yourself, that struggle with faith. And I was thinking of like John the Baptist. And because you know, Thomas is interesting, but we don't really know how long. We know, we can guesstimate how long Thomas was kind of dealing with all these doubts of, okay, come on. But it seems like a much shorter time to me than even a John the Baptist. Like, I find that interesting, Aaron, you know, and love to hear your thoughts on this. But like around Matthew 11, Jesus is doing all these miracles. And then you have John the Baptist in jail. And I don't know if you thought much about that, but the Thomas one made me think of John the Baptist, because there's sort of that funny story, right, in verse 2 of Matthew 11, where he has two friends of his show up. They're like the most insensitive guys ever created, because he's in jail and they're like, hey, is John there? They're like, yeah, go on. He's in the dungeon, third on the left. You know, they kind of climb down the stairs and he's all like, you know, can't eat, can't, you know, and they're like, John. And the Bible literally says they're just like going on and on about all that Jesus is doing. I'm just like, some people's faith, like their doubt, some people's doubt and their deconstruction can actually be the fact that we live in such a like exploitive success culture where we hear about everybody else and how great they're doing. And, you know, like a girl on Instagram that spirals just personally in doubt just because she sees the images of other girls and what they look like. And so I find that really interesting, because John the Baptist sends back that message, Aaron, where he's like, are you the Christ? Like he's deconstructing his faith. He's like,
Well,
wait a minute, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the story of John the Baptist. So that question John the Baptist asked, where it's like, hey, are you the one? Are you the Christ? Or should we look for another? Did that question come when he was in prison?
Yeah, let me read it to you. Verse chapter 11. This is what of Matthew says. Now it came to pass when Jesus departed, and the previous verses, Luke's gospel tells us there's just miracles going off everywhere. It's kind of like the buzz in the town. And John is in prison, and it says when John heard in prison about the works of Jesus, and when you combine it with Luke's gospel, the sense you get is these two guys come and tell him all this amazing stuff. And it's sort of like that insensitive friend when you're like, you just lost your job and they're telling you about their promo, or your girlfriend dumped you and they're telling you about the met the woman of their dreams. So doubt can come sometimes by the success of others. And Thomas was like the evidential type trust, right? Or doubt.
Right.
But John the Baptist seems to be like, are you going to do anything in my situation?
Right. Yeah. Just because, like, let's just remind the audience about John the Baptist's situation. He's like, he's from the family of Jesus. So he's Jesus's cousin. His whole life, he's probably being told by his parents about like who Jesus is, and Mary, and the whole story about the angel, and this idea of like Jesus is the one, and he has all this faith in Jesus. And then that climactic moment, where Jesus comes and John gets to baptize him, and it's like just the Spirit descends like a dove, and it's this great, amazing moment. So John is like this radical guy of faith, like one of the most faithful guys you could have. But then things go rough for him, and Jesus isn't like taking over Israel by storm and overthrowing the Romans, and then the Romans put John in jail. And so John's like, whoa, everything I thought was true might not actually be. And maybe I wasted my entire life,
Yeah, totally.
It's
and
rough.
I just think when I think of Thomas, I think of John as the same thing, kind of rotten in jail. And, I think in our culture, it's like we look for those like snap-worthy photo moments where we can do the selfie and be like, look how amazing. Even Instagram makes fun of Instagram now, that they have like in my my Instagram life and in reality, right? I saw one just this morning. It was hilarious. It was like a married couple in bed, and they're having like tea in the morning, and it's like perfect, and there's China, and they're like in reality, and they showed how they set it all up in this just really horrible hotel room, but the way it came across. And so John has a high point, right? Thomas had a high point, of course, with Jesus. John has a high point, but now he's in the background. And that can happen to a lot of people. They start doubting Jesus because they're not feeling the moment anymore. But again, it's that message Jesus says to them, right? Go tell John the things which you've heard and which you've seen. Like, go back to the evidence, guys. And that's so key, isn't it, Aaron?
Yes.
Just to kind of like go back to what God did do. Just because you're not feeling your faith, don't throw your faith. Just because you're not getting that emotion in the moment doesn't mean God's forgotten you.
That's really good. So I'm going to jump back into the second half of the lesson here, because what you just said totally leads in. Like, perfect. I don't know how you did that, Joel, but somehow you sensed it and you predicted it.
I guess the Holy Spirit knows.
There you go. Okay, so let's keep going here. So like Joel said, he was talking about with doubt, it's so important to not just encourage people to dwell on their doubt, but to point them back to what's true, point them back to what they know. Here, let me throw my slides back up. Give me a second to remember how to do that. There we go. Okay. So here's a quote from Tim Mackey, right, from the Bible Project. If you don't know his stuff, check it out. It'll blow your mind and encourage your faith. Tim says this: it's so important that we learn to deconstruct our doubt and go to the source of the doubt. And an analogy that we could use for this is like, so remember, again, this is the context of we're dealing with young Christians and they're struggling with deconstruction. And it can be something for us as leaders. We're just like, this is overwhelming. What do I do? How do I approach this? You got to think of it in terms that are helpful. A helpful analogy I go to is, think about a car. If you buy a car isn't designed with a flaw, right? It's not designed in the factory. The manufacturers don't design it to break down. But what happens is, over time, and use and wear and tear and long drives and road trips and bumpy roads, things eventually begin to break down. And so the answer is not to just throw the car away, it's to take it apart, deconstruct the car, and see what is wrong, what is going on inside. And we need to help our young people and just the Christians in our life who are deconstructing to realize that, hey, I know this seems scary and I know this feels terrifying and your faith feels like it's falling apart. But first, realize that this isn't a design feature, it's a bug. And you need to look at the circumstances of your life, the things that are going on, and pick that apart. Don't just deconstruct your faith. I understand you're doing that, but also deconstruct your doubt a little bit too. Give your faith a fair shake and look at the circumstances of your life. This is another thing Tim says here. Doubt is often not a result of deep-seated beliefs, but circumstances that shake those beliefs. So we examine the root cause versus what do I actually know to be true. We examine the root cause versus what do I actually know to be true. So like, think about this. Someone is struggling with doubt, right? They haven't even gone down that path of deconstruction yet. They're just doubting that God is good because someone in their life, a parent, a grandparent, a cousin, somebody they love is struggling with sickness. And so it's like, man, this is really causing me to doubt. Okay, contrast that with what do you actually know to be true? What are ways in your life that God has proven that he's good? Think about like just big justice issues. This is a big one. Gen Z right now is so in tune with justice issues. And so one thing I've heard from young people is just like, I don't understand. I see these pictures of like kids starving in third world countries. If that's true, how could God actually be good? And so with that, you have to then take them to the scripture and explain to them, like you have to explain to them this idea of like, God is not the one depriving those kids in those third world countries. There is this problem of sin and evil, and then point them to the truth. And God doesn't just sit around and let that happen and say, yeah, it's no big deal to me. Like if people starve, I don't care. No, God is actively fighting to save people, to rescue and redeem people, and to actually rebuild the world, to make a new heaven and earth where there's no more starvation, there's no more sickness, there's no more death. And so like, or even think about like the idea of sin. Like this is a big problem with doubt comes from going to like that root thing that happened at the Garden of Eden, right? Where you have the snake, the serpent, right? Satan. And he says, did God actually say not to do this? What's the big deal? So many young people struggle with doubt because of sin, because they're going through things in their life. They want to numb the pain through sin. And the sin feels great. It numbs the pain. And so it's like, how is this actually a bad thing? And we start to doubt and we start to say like, does scripture actually say that this is wrong? I don't know. I want to kind of figure that out. That's a real thing that many of you guys are facing and watching young people struggle with. And I think of Thomas, like he looks at Jesus and he's like, I saw him die. That's his doubt. I saw him die. I don't understand how this could happen. We wasted 3 years. Our whole lives are falling apart. And he has to then go to the source. He has to go and find out, why did I believe Jesus was good in the first place? And Thomas can't get there himself. And so Jesus bridges that gap and he shows up. And I love that. And I think that is what Jesus wants to do for so many young people. He wants to bridge that gap. He wants to show up in their life. And that's what I'm praying for all of my friends that I went to school with, people that I love who struggle with doubt and who have deconstructed their faith. I know plenty of people who have done that. And the prayer that I pray for them is specifically like, do what you did for Thomas. Show up in their life and make them an offer they can't refuse. Prove to them. Show them the holes in your hands and the wound in your side. And that's the attitude we got to have for our young people who are struggling with this. Just praying for them. God, show up. And don't put the burden on yourself to fix them. Like you can't fix broken people. You can play a part, but don't put the burden on yourself to fix broken people. Pray for them and then take the opportunities God gives you to speak truth into their life and help point them back to the truth. Now, there is so much talk right now about the struggle of deconstruction. And like I said in the intro to this, the problem that we're seeing with deconstruction is people saying, oh man, I was hurt by the church, or I was taught this, but it's not actually true. Or, I learned young earth creationism, but now I'm convinced that, evolution and all that stuff, the Big Bang and millions of years, and I can't make that work with my faith, right? This is this struggle of deconstruction, this pulling of a thread. And this is what I remember literally, I remember talking to a young girl in my youth group, and she came to me and she was just like, yeah, I love Jesus. I love Christianity. I've been studying, and she was a really smart girl. And she's like, I've been studying, I've been reading, and I'm convinced that evolution is actually true. And what she said was, I don't believe that we just came from nothing. I believe that God is the one who started the evolutionary process. So she was a believer in what's called theistic evolution. And then what she said broke my heart, because she was like, I told my parents and they were like, you can't be a Christian and believe that. And if you believe that, then you're not in the faith anymore. And that just broke my heart, because what we're seeing a lot of times is young people struggling with these doubts. And we just immediately like draw lines in the sand. And it's like, oh, you don't have your doctrine completely right. Like, you don't agree with all the same things I do. And so therefore I'm going to push you away and draw the line in the sand. And this is my analogy of what happens with deconstruction, which, I mean, essentially deconstruction is leading to destruction of faith. Imagine, this is the analogy I try to talk to young people with. Imagine you own a house and you find termites in that house, and they're eating at the wood and they're making the wood rotten. What do? I say, call an exterminator, identify the termites, kill the termites, and strengthen your house. What a lot of deconstructionists end up doing is they burn their house down. They find termites in the house and then they just light it on fire and they burn the whole thing down over time. And then they're just spiritually homeless. When I talk about termites, like, what I'm referring to is those little like gnawing doubts where it's like, I grew up in a church that believes this about eschatology, but I'm not exactly sure it's true. Or, I grew up Calvinist, but I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Or I grew up Arminian and I actually think maybe it's Calvinism or whatever. Or like, oh my goodness, I've seen news stories about how churches were abusive. Or, oh my goodness, I've heard news stories about how churches were like so wrapped up in politics that they didn't actually care about people and they pushed people away and they hurt people. I've heard all of this in the last, especially over the last couple of years. I've heard so much of these kind of things. And what I see is young people, instead of going, I want to hold on to my faith, they just start throwing the gasoline of social media and outside influences on it. And then it all goes up in flames. And it's so sad. And so we need to be advocates for people who are doubting and even deconstructing, not to come alongside them and say, hey, this is great. Yes, like, burn your faith down. But to say, hey, why don't you walk through this with a mentor? Like, why don't we together examine these things that you're struggling with? And then this is really important. There are times where I have young people speaking to me and they start talking about their church hurt. And I don't know their pastor or their church, but they'll just talk about how they were hurt by their church. Like, literally, I remember talking to one group of kids and it was like, yeah, like, I started dressing like a goth. And the minute I started doing that as like a fashion choice, because I was going through my weird phase in high school, my church literally like treated me like dirt. Like I was some satanic warlock kid just because I wore eyeliner or something. And you hear these stories and it's so easy. And I see this all the time on social media, on Christian social media. It's so easy to hear stories of hurt and pain from people that they experienced at their church. And we just go into defense mode for the church. And it's like, well, like, maybe you were in sin. Like maybe you shouldn't have been wearing that eyeliner. Maybe it's your fault. I just think, we don't know everyone's story. But I think in those moments, the right response is to say, I am so sorry that happened to you in your church. I'm so sorry Christians treated you that way. But let me actually tell you about Jesus, because they weren't living up to the standard that he was actually calling the church to live up to, which is to love unconditionally. not to condone people's sin and say, hey, you sin, great, come hang out and sin at our church. No, but it's God's kindness that leads to repentance. So I'm going to go on a bit. I think that God invites his children to know him better through questions. Like he's not afraid. He's not the dad who's just like, shut up, don't ask questions. Like, leave me alone. No, he invites, like his posture is ask, seek, and knock. And that is what we need to point people to. It's so much better to point young people to the pursuit of asking and seeking and knowing God instead of just being like, for every question, just being like, I don't know, God works in mysterious ways. That is a surefire path to push them away. Because if you're not doing the work to help them ask, seek, and knock, and sometimes that means for me, like if a young person asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm going to go home and spend hours studying their question because I want to help them. Like when you're a youth pastor, it's so easy to be so busy that you can't engage with these kind of questions and do the work. But I would encourage every youth pastor listening to this, do the work to engage with your young people's questions and never act like you have it together and never just pull some answer that, is just pulling it out of thin air that doesn't actually apply. Like if you don't know something, be honest and say, I don't actually know that, but I'm going to study that. And I'm going to come back and we're going to have a conversation when I'm done because this matters. I think that's really important. So the last cheesy youth pastor analogy I'll give you is think of doubt like this. Think of doubt like a pile of bricks. If you just got a pile of bricks, what do you've got? It's a wall, right? It's in between you and something else. But what else can you do with bricks? You can build a bridge. I think for so many people, there are doubts. It's like we need to engage and show them what to do with their doubts. Because if we don't, the world will. It's not a matter of if you will face doubt as a Christian. I think it's a matter of when. And when the time comes, what are you going to do with it? And what I encourage young people is allow Jesus to walk with you through the deconstruction and then be willing to allow him to reconstruct you. Not culture, not politics, not social media thinkers and activists. He will take those bricks and build a bridge back to him, a stronger foundation. It takes time. I encourage young people, invite loving mentors in. And I encourage you as the mentors listening to this, be there for those doubters. Don't push them away. Don't get exhausted with them. Don't get frustrated with them and just say, can you just stop doubting and believe? No, like invite them into a space where you can be there for them. And if you've got kids in your youth group or your church group who are not struggling with doubt and they start to get judgmental, like you got to beat that out of them. That's the wrong phrase. Don't beat them out. You know what I mean? You got to like lovingly encourage them, right? To not be judgmental. Like invite your strong kids who are strong in the faith, invite them to be the kind of people who are going to lovingly help their friends through their doubt, who are going to be the kind of friends who say, hey, let's talk about that. Like I'm a safe space. Like you can talk to me, no shame, no judgment. Like just throw your craziest, wildest doubt at me and I'll pray for you. I'll share some insight. You don't have to agree, I found that to be so effective. I have people, I say this not out of pride. I just say this because I think it's important. I have people in my life who are not Christian, some formerly Christian. Now they hate Christianity. And I spend time with them and I talk to them and I try to love them. And they'll say to me like, Aaron, you're the only Christian that I talk to because you're the only Christian that doesn't treat me like I'm cancer. And I don't say that out of pride because I can be a jerk. There's times where I've been rude to those people as well. But I think of that and I'm like, wow, this person says you're the only Christian that will talk to me and I feel safe talking to you. We need more of that. Like I want every Christian, every kid that comes through my youth group, I want them all to have somebody that they can talk to and they feel safe with that person. And the thing is, like all my friends who are not Christian and they're, secular, card carrying, like leftist, communist. Literally, I've got some friends that are like straight up like communists, card carrying. Like they'll tell me like, hey, I'm a communist. but they'll say, I don't feel pushed away by you. Like I feel like you love me. And they know where I stand on issues like sexuality or abortion. Like they know where I stand because I tell them, we have conversations, but I don't do the jerk for Jesus thing. I don't push them away. I'm trying to draw them to something. And I know that I might not be the person to say the sinner's prayer with them and bring them back to Christ, but I believe that I'm planting seeds that even 10 years from now, when they're at their lowest point, God can bring to mind the conversations they've had with me and probably many other Christians that are pouring into their lives, and that it can be something that'll help them get past that point, beyond that shadow of a doubt. I love this quote from Evan Wickham. He says this: modernism says, I think, therefore I am. Postmodernism says, I doubt, therefore I deconstruct. But Christianity says, I love, or I am loved, therefore I love. I love this. Yes, it's so important for us to deconstruct that doubt. But even more than that, it's always important for us to use the foundation of God's love as our foundation for everything. We have to point doubting and deconstructing people back to just the reality that they're loved. I'm going to wrap this up in a minute and then go on to discuss a little bit more with Joel. But I want to talk about one more Bible character, Peter. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm just going to throw away my notes and just do this freehand so I'm not beholden to them. Think about Peter for a second. We have Doubting Thomas, who got that nickname. Peter. Oh my gosh, that guy doubted so much. Like, we all know that story in the garden, right? Where Jesus is being beaten, tried falsely, about to be crucified. And people are like, hey, you're buddies with Jesus, right? And he's like, oh, no, I don't know him. That's this crazy moment of doubt. Like, I would think like, for a young person in our youth groups, like a good parallel of that would be like, you grew up in the church, you love Jesus, you're serving him, and then all of a sudden, like, the culture starts becoming hostile towards Christianity. Like, prime example, this whole Roe versus Wade thing that's happening right now. Like, people are really mad at Christians because of this. And so the culture is like hostile, and then they're like, hey, aren't you a Christian? And a young person is like, oh no, like, that's just my parents' church. Like, I just, and in their mind, and in their heart, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. But they don't want to be associated because they're afraid that they're going to be publicly crucified by their friends, like, to use a crude analogy. So you've got Peter, and he struggles with doubt in that moment. He doesn't believe that Jesus is big enough to save him because Jesus is not walking around in that moment, like healing people and raising people from the dead. Jesus is being crucified. Like, so Peter's like, oh my gosh, I doubt that I can be saved in this moment. So I'm going to run and hide and lie and deny I even know Jesus. And the story that really gets me with Peter is him walking on water. Think about that story. Like, Jesus is out on the water, walking on water. Everyone's freaking out. Like, this is weird. This is not normal. This should not be happening. We're going to die. It's a ghost. And Peter's like, no, that's Jesus. That's the Lord. I'm going to him. And Peter walks on that water by faith, right? By faith, Peter walks on water. And like, what a glorious moment for Peter. Like, he is riding high on spirituality in that moment. Like, he is like, I am walking on water. Like, none of us have done that. None of us have done that. But then what happens? Like, he sees the wind, he sees the waves, he doubts, and then he sinks. He doubts, and then he sinks. And the beautiful thing about that story is what is Jesus's response, right? We talked about Thomas and the response. It's not anger. It's not bursting through the walls. How dare you? It's, hey, Thomas, look at the holes in my hand. Think about Peter. His greatest moment of faith, walking on water, and then his greatest moment of doubt. And how does Jesus respond? Does he look at Peter and say, can't believe you even tried it. Walking on water, rookie move. You didn't have enough faith, Peter. Now you're going to drown. Like, is that his response, to just leave him? No, he reaches down and he pulls Peter back up and brings him back to the boat. Like, that is beautiful to me. Like, I'm getting a little emotional. Like, It was the faith in Jesus's power that allowed Peter to walk on water. But it was the love of Jesus that pulled Peter back up when Peter sank. In Peter's greatest moment of faith, Jesus was there. In Peter's greatest moment of doubt, Jesus was there. And so that is like what we need to be communicating to our people. Like, Jesus is here. He's with you. He will pull you back up when you sink. And even if you're not ready for that, his arms are out. His arms are wide open, outstretched. He's waiting to pull you back up. You might be pushing him away. No, Jesus, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want the faith of my fathers. I don't want the faith I grew up in. I want this new stuff. I want this shiny new postmodern theory and all this stuff, like all this stuff that the world is telling me, like this is the answer to life's problems. I don't want the gospel. Sure, I'd love to still go to heaven, get out of jail free card. I'm still kind of holding on to that, but I'm going to go sin and do whatever I want. Jesus is there in those moments, just holding out his hands, just waiting for them to take that hand. And he doesn't leave. And that is the heart that we need for our people, to just remind them. Like, I think that has to be step one. It all comes back to the love of Christ. And like, I don't have all the answers to like how to help people like fight deconstruction. That's a long, complicated thing. I'd encourage you to go on our website, goodlion.org, and you can find some great conversations we have with Dominic Doan about that. He wrote a book called When Faith Fails. There's another book called Beyond Doubt that's really great. There's tons of great resources. I'll try to put in the links, the show notes of this video, I'll try to put some good links to some great resources for you guys. But I think as a starting point, like I would just encourage, I mean, if you want to steal my outline for this message and talk about Peter and Thomas, like go for it. I don't care. Like, I'm not even an active youth pastor anymore. So email me. I'll literally send you my sermon notes. You can preach the same message and tweak it. I want young people to understand that Jesus is there for them. And I think sometimes just knowing that he's there can make the hugest difference. I'm going to bring Joel back on and I'm going to close with a quick story before Joel and I go into some conversation. But I remember hearing this story that really impacted me. It's in one of the books that I referenced. I think the book Beyond Doubt. But there was a girl who grew up in a super religious, like Christian home. And her mom gave her no privacy. Like, her mom was always barging in, like just barging into the room, never knocking on the door, just coming in and like, what are you doing? Are you sinning? Are you messing up? Are you stumbling? Like, what's going on? And so she just could not wait to get out of the Christian environment. She just wanted to bail as soon as she got of age. And so she goes off and struggles with sin and just leaves her faith behind. And then she goes through what happens to a lot of millennials, which is when you have your first kid, you start going back to church, not because you believe it, but because you're like, I want my kids to be in a nice, pleasant, moral environment. So she goes back to church and she's sitting in church and she hears a sermon that's all about Jesus's call to ask, seek, and knock. He says, I stand at the door and knock. I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone opens it, I'll come in and dine with them. And she thinks back to her mom and how her mom would always just burst in. And that was her idea of religion, just bursting in, God demanding, just, you need to repent. You need to stop being a sinner. You need to get your act together. And she hears the story of Jesus, like he doesn't barge in. He stands at the door and knocks. And if you come and answer that door, he's going to come in and dine with you. And that was like when the light switch went on in her head and she realized, like, I need Jesus. And she had totally deconstructed her faith, like all of it. Like, she had left it behind, but it was just a simple sermon, right, on the truth that flipped that switch on. And so my encouragement to anyone listening who has young people, you might be like me where you're just heartbroken because there's people you can think of who you're like, I baptized that person and they've walked away. That hurts. That hurts. And I've been through that. And like many of you have probably been through that. I'm an emotional guy. If you know me well, you know that this is not weird for me to get all emotional about stuff like this. Yeah, it's hard to watch people that you love walk away. But I've seen many of them come back, and it's not because of me. It's not because I said the right things. It's not because I, sent them the perfect verse. God has used me as a part of the process to bring some people back. But overall, like, I look at all the people I've seen restored, and I'm like, that was him. It was his spirit. It was his leading. It was his guiding, and him being willing to suffer long with that person and walk with them through their struggle. And to say, I'm going to be patient. You're sinking. I'm holding out my hand. I'm going to pull you back up. You're doubting. I'm going to show up, and I'm going to continue to show you the holes in the hands. And that's the attitude I think we need to have as leaders, as people in ministry. Let's not be like the older brother who just says, I can't believe they're doubting after all I did for them. No, let's be like Jesus, who is patient and long suffering. So that's the end of my talk. Joel, if you've got any questions, you can throw them at me. If anybody is watching on YouTube and you want to put some questions in the chat on the side, you can do that. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And I'm super blessed to be part of the conference and to be able to share my perspective on this stuff. So, yeah.
It's awesome, bro. Love it, man. Yeah, a couple things come to mind. I mean, first, it has to be said, love your heart for people. Love your heart for Jesus.
Thanks,
if
Thanks,
we're
man.
not feeling these kind of losses when we experience them, like, why are we doing what we're doing? We're here because we care about people. We want to see people given the grace, I think, that you're talking about, Aaron, to explore and deal with doubt and know that doubt is a part of our faith. It's not the absence of doubt that makes us solid believers. It's just the reality that, like you said, I also thought it was cool what you said about kind of like the patience thing. So maybe I'll respond to a few things that hit my heart and what you shared, if that's all right. And then
please do. I'm really quick. I'm going to take off this overshirt because it is so hot. I don't know what I'm doing.
I was just going to suggest that. I was going to say, take that overshirt off. So, just responding, guys, what we've just heard, what Aaron brought across there. I love the picture of patience with people too, because I think even in my own life, I can tend to react even with my own kids. Like, oh no, sometimes I'll have a kid that's like exploring some avenue and it's not outright sin, but it's maybe something I'm not super comfortable with. But I just remember that, if we're not careful, we just clamp down right away, that can create even more rebellion. And so when it comes to doubt, just kind of giving some rope to go, okay, hold on, slow down. We don't need to rush right in and correct that. I think that's very common even in evangelism. We meet people, and if we're argumentative right away, we're not going to see people come to Jesus. I've never led someone to Christ through an argument. So, but just actually having the maturity to listen and walk through, the doubts and the questions and the things like that. So even from the perspective of those watching, if you're helping someone else that's wrestling with doubt, I think the patience part really hit me. Probably also my favorite part of what you said is, and there was kind of a question that came in on this is, more a comment to just like, we have to, and here's a quote, we have to also deconstruct doubt. And so somebody sort of commented and brought out the fact that that's a great quote, that we shouldn't just let doubt is a part of our faith, but it's important also to go, well, let's break that down and not stop there and just depart from faith, but we deconstruct our faith, but why not deconstruct doubt? So somebody really loved that you shared that. Maybe you can talk about that a little more, or what hits you on that, or I could, whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, because if we believe that our faith is true, we have to fight for it. You know what I mean? Because everybody believes something. Like everyone has some sort of faith. Like if you can be totally atheist, agnostic, but you're putting your faith in something. whether it's the government or whether it's just yourself or your own group, you know, whatever group affirms and accepts you, and you're putting faith in that to give you life and give you purpose. Everybody puts faith, even just your, you know, your own morality. You can be totally atheistic and just be like, I'm going to be a good person, you know? And so everybody has a worldview. Like, it's not like you can just leave faith and walk away from faith. No matter what, you're going to have a faith system. So I think instead of giving up when people start to walk away, we need to invite them to, like, at least say, hey, before you go, can we take a minute to examine, is there something in your life that has happened that is actually causing some of this doubt? Like, are you experiencing something? Is there something you're experiencing? Have you been hurt by the church? Let's talk about that. Is there some suffering in your life that you can't process and figure out?
That's great.
Maybe
Practical.
like maybe somebody went to a, you know, prosperity church, and it was like, hey, if you follow Jesus, you'll be wealthy and healthy and happy. And they're like, I am none of those three things. This is me.
Only two of those apply to me. Yeah, that's good.
I won't ask which ones. But yeah, so it's like, how do we help people deconstruct those doubts and like start? Yeah. It's like, hey, if you're going to take all this time to pick apart your faith, at least do your due diligence to also take some time to pick apart your dart. I'm starting to get to that point where you've been talking for a long time that you start slurring your words.
All right. I'll dive in. Yeah, no, because I can piggyback that for a little bit, perhaps, and say, I think sometimes we think that, you know, if I don't have all the answers to my questions or my situation, then either God doesn't exist, or maybe even worse for some, he doesn't care. And, but I think it's really important to remember it. Let's say you know, your spiritual house is one where you've crossed the line of faith. He's called us into a relationship, guys, of trust and growth. And the tough things, the things that can imprison all of us, myself included, and take you into those deep, dark places, they're not, I would say, simply allowed in our lives to take us out, but to actually grow us up. So to see opportunity instead of just obstacle. And that worked really well sermonically. But anyway, here's the other thing. I believe that God has called us into relationship. Yeah. And the root of 100%. That isn't always problem solution. I could say in my own marriage, and now I have to be careful. But I just had my 23rd anniversary on Sunday. And there's a lot that I know about my wife. She loves science. She loves working out. She loves coffee, candles, a clean house, me to clean the house, me to pick up clothes that I've left in the house that make the house dirt. Anyway, you get the point. So those are the things I know about her. But I mean, and every now and then she'll do something where I'm like, where did that come from? That surprised me. And that doesn't make me just spiral or need to spiral. It's like mystery is sort of like the lifeblood of intimacy. And we shouldn't always think I have to figure everything out for me to be okay. I don't want like the Truman Show where, you know, you wake up every day, you wave the same way. Hi, honey, going to work. Here's your coffee. Here's your bag. Dress the same outfit. No, like mystery's the lifeblood of intimacy. I really believe that. So that allows us to just kind of have that exploration, because I think, you know, even C.S. Lewis, we'd have to say deconstructed his faith when his wife died, right? Like he wrote a book about it. And I just...
What was the name of that book? I know I've read it. The Problem of Pain, maybe?
Yeah, The Problem of Pain. And I'm just Googling... Here's that quote. I know why sometimes you utter no answers, he said after his wife's death. It's because you yourself are the answer. Before your face, all questions die away. Yeah. And I think, like, you know, in the sense where you brought up Thomas, Peter, I brought up John, these guys all kind of ended up moving on from this idea that it's not okay to live in the tension of unresolved faith, that it's, and in fact, that it's normal for great, even mighty men and women of God to go through doubt, but don't stop there. Yeah. It's a part
think
of your
about
faith. You want to move on.
think about Thomas and Peter. Like, how did they both die? They died as martyrs.
Yeah.
Like, that takes a ton of faith. Like, they could have just walked away at any point, but they lost their faith and then they got it back and they ended up dying for it because they probably even appreciated it when it was renewed even more, to be like, this is the realest thing in the world. Like, I'm willing to die for this. And it's hard.
That's
I don't know
good.
if you ever feel this way, Joel, but sometimes I think about the people in my life that used to be Christians and now they hate Christianity. And it's so hard to like picture them coming back because the hate is so strong. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so hard to even picture what that would look like. But I have to have faith that God can do that. You know what I mean? Like, I have to have enough faith that God can rescue someone from that warped way of thinking and help them see the goodness of who he is and help them deconstruct all that doubt and all that baggage and garbage that comes with, and even like helping them process through hurt and pain. Like, maybe they have been, I know people personally that like they were abused at their church. They were hurt at their church. They were let down at their church. But I think Jesus has an answer for that. And it's not to say, oh, that was fine, that's no big deal. No, it's to process through that and then and find healing from that and healing from that trauma. And then to find a group of Christians that aren't going to hurt you that way. And that's not a burden I think we can put on people and say, you just need to find a better church. It's like, I'm praying that Jesus, please guide them to the right group of people that are going to. Yeah.
No, I mean, I feel the same way. I feel like a lot of people sort of deconstruct or even leave the faith, if you will, because they're offended by something Christian. But it's like, hold on, just because they're offended by something Christian, pull out and don't block the Christ part of that. Because, when I start thinking through the, if you will, the what comes out of Christianity doesn't always match with what comes out of Christ, of course. And people get held up on that. I met a guy on a flight once. I was sitting next to him. You could tell he had a Christian background, very colorful language. And he was a businessman. He said, I would never go back to church, be a Christian because I was so burnt by Christian businessmen. Wow. And so he kind of was like, I'm done with Christianity because of these guys. And I was like, well, hold on. Like, don't block Christ because of Christians. Christians will let you down. Christians are, by design, we're broken. We're under the curse. We're going to let you down. So maybe you're watching this video. Someone sent you this link. And I would encourage you to don't block Christ, because even, there's a blessing in going beyond the offense. And I was referencing John the Baptist earlier, but the thing that I think put John the Baptist back on track was Jesus said to him, blessed are you if you're not offended because of me. So don't just take the offense and let it derail you, John, but go beyond the offense to the evidence for who I am. And I think that's what we're talking about. There's some common things that block people that they believe are evidential that aren't even Christ. Like, I had a bad church experience. Okay, well, there's no perfect church.
Yeah.
I had a bad burger a couple months ago. I didn't give up on burgers. I promise.
Dude, that's okay. So that's an analogy that Brian Higgins and I did on our podcast a while ago. Yeah. I love that we're thinking on the burger wavelength here, but we were talking about like, there are some people who had a bad experience with Christianity.
Yeah.
And so it's like, never again. Like, and it'd be like, imagine if you went to a hamburger place, like a place that called itself literally like burger shop on the outside. And then you go to get a burger and it's like, they're taking like an old shoe and instead of like as a bun, and like, instead of a hamburger patty, it's just like a slice of deli ham that's like old, and they're putting like just junk on there, man. Like, dirt. Like, and then they hand it to you and it's like, here's your burger. And you're like, what the? And you try it and you're like, oh, it's horrible.
That's it. I'm done with burgers.
Yeah. How sad would it be if you never got to experience burgers because of just that one experience where someone claimed something was a burger, but it wasn't. And then you never actually got the chance to try a real burger.
Well, not even that. Like, I mean, that's a great illustration too. But I mean, mine's a literal thing that happened. We have a Five Guys burger right across the road. I went in one day and just, I don't know if the ladies behind the counter was like, let's get him. This guy's up. Joel's always in here. So let's just throw a frozen patty in there and see what happens. But I bit into it. It was just awful. And so I took an inordinate amount of time just done with burgers because that bad experience. It was at least 4 days before I had another one. And just the suffering in those 4 days of not eating burgers and swearing off them and then completely going back into the same place and having a good experience. But I mean,
there's something to that. Yeah.
But even, so if it's not bad church, it's bad Christians, right? People are like, oh, Christians are hypocrites. Well, kind of everybody's a hypocrite. Do you always do what you're going to say you're going to do 100% of the time? Consistently, always? No, of course you don't. If you're married, just ask your spouse if that's true. I think that's another one where people kind of go, I met a bad one. Well,
no, dude, I mean, that resonates. I mean, I remember going on a trip with my dad when I was like 14 and we were up in the mountains and I got some pizza and I love pizza. Always have loved pizza. I don't know what happened, but I ate that pizza and then I threw up afterwards. I didn't touch pizza for like a year. Yeah. And I think there's something to this analogy that we're making because sometimes like we can be really impatient with people and they're like, I just can't come back to church. And we're like, dude, just shut up and come back to church. What's wrong with you? Like, just come on, man, just get back in there. And it's like, sometimes the trauma that people go through and the struggle that people go through in religious environments, it can just cause this like twisting in their stomach where it's like the minute they start hearing praise music or a sermon or a pastor, it's like all of that trauma comes back. And so I think we need to like be long suffering with people. Like one place that I go to with people is like, I've talked to guys before and they're like, they were hurt in like an institutional church, like a mega church, and they're just like, I just can't go back. And I'm like, all right, I get that. I understand that. What about like a house church? What about just like, that's just as much a church as anything else. Like you've grown up in this paradigm that makes you think like the mega church is a church, but like if you have a community of like 10 people in a home and they're reading the scriptures, they're praying, they're studying God's word together, they're taking communion together, they're praying for one another, they're confessing sin, like that's church, man. And sometimes people are like, whoa, like, you mean I can go to that and I'm not sinning? Like I don't have to go to, the Calvary Chapel down the street or whatever. And I'm like, no, like I'd love for you to be there because that's where I'm at. And I'd love to sit next to you and sing with you. But if you can't be there, I understand. Like, here's some friends I know who have a house church down the road. Go there. Like, go there and be blessed. Like you'll be blown away at how different it is. And I think sometimes that's what people need is like, they've had such a hard time in their church experience and they've never seen it done differently. So they look at a different mega church and they just instantly are suspicious. And they're like, that pastor probably just wants my money and just wants me to tithe, but then he's going to verbally abuse me and treat me poorly. And there's going to be gossip about me in this church.
So much of that comes in, doesn't it? So much of that comes in through the doors. We see it quite a lot, but you make a great point. I think there's another aspect of when I think of doubt and deconstruction that would be good to say also, because while we wrestle, while others have wrestled in the faith, I do think also that doubt can lead to definite answers and that we shouldn't give up on that. And Lewis talks about that in his book. But I think also even Jesus and his response, I don't know if it was Thomas or maybe it was John the Baptist again, but he kind of speaks about go tell them the things you've seen. Well, it's John the Baptist. Go tell them the things you've seen, like that there's evidence. And so I would say also, I think some people think because they got burnt in some way, had some bad experience, that now they've already landed on and decided the evidence. But that for me personally, I'll just talk about me personally, and I'd be curious what your thoughts on this are too, Aaron. But like for me personally, it's like, I think I've arrived on some doctrines and it's like, this is where I've landed. And then like 5 years later, I'm like, no, I guess I'm slightly here now. And that's okay. And so, I believe that there's some like views of God even that people have. Like, well, we can't prove the existence of God. I'm like, well, okay. I feel like I have good evidence of that, enough that suffices. Science and God, you brought up earlier in your message and made a good point about that. I just think like most of our science books were written by people who believed in God. Think of like
That's true.
Galileo, and
It's
Newton,
true.
and Kepler, Maxwell, Babbage. Like these guys,
Mm.
they
Mm.
wrote the science books that formed a lot of what we're doing
Yeah.
in school, and said some amazing things about God. So these are
Mm.
people that I would just humbly say are far more brilliant than me. So probably
Yeah.
if you are a viewer and you're watching this, they might be more, smarter than you as well. They're people that went through doubt and then came out on the other side saying the science matches as well. So I don't think it's wrong to keep going. I think we need to say, just because you're like, oh, I doubt this, so I'm giving up. We're saying don't give up, but also I would say don't give up pursuing the truth. Validity of scripture for me was a hard thing when I was a teenager, and I got a hold of a book that was all about manuscripts. That there's actually more manuscripts, 25,000 of the New Testament, than all the works that are quoted as top places and sources in universities. I actually called up a university when I was a young man, and I was like, what's the top manuscripted source that you use in the university? And they said, oh, it's Homer's Iliad. And I said, do you know how many manuscripts there are? They said, no. And I said, there's 643. And this was the professor of history, believe it or not. And I said, are you aware how many there are in the New Testament? He goes, no. I said, 25,000. So for me, I needed to have this showdown with this prof to really bring me back to the Lord. I was like, wow, the Bible's solid. And I've seen a lot of YouTubers deconstruct their faith and depart because of bad information. I want to throw that out there. If you're like, oh, I watched these two cool guys deconstruct their faith and that's all it took. Listen, so what? Keep going, man. And grab a hold of some evidence of the man. It's pretty outstanding how God's protected his word.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. There's a couple of YouTubers that I know of that I actually love. Rhett and Link, who are they're comedians, super popular guys. They did the whole deconstruction thing, and it's so sad because these were guys who actually were missionaries for a long time. Like they were kind of in a YWAM, I think, or no, I'm not sure. It might have been YWAM. Yeah, Youth with a Mission. They were with some organization for a long time.
I've watched a little bit of theirs.
Yeah, and their whole life was like kind of built, and then they went into comedy and moved to LA and started to deconstruct. And it's just sad they left the faith, and like they've taken their wives and kids with them on that deconstruction, leaving the faith journey. And it's sad because they grew up in like a very kind of harsh minded church mentality. So that's a big thing that started to cause them to leave.
Pushback.
Yeah. And as I was listening to them describe their experience, I was just like, well, that's not true about God. That's not true. Like, yes, I agree that thing that you're describing, I agree that's a sin, but I don't think that the way that your church handled it is actually the way that God's heart would handle it. And so, I think that we need to continue to point people back to Jesus and not to defend even our own churches and say like, oh, our churches are great. You just need to try harder to get along and get to know people. It's like if someone's having a bad experience, we need to always point them back to, hey, I'm sorry, but let's look at Jesus.
Totally.
But before we close, I think this would be a good way to end. So I want to throw up, this is from a sermon I heard that really blessed me by Evan Wickham. So he says this: in one of my favorite stories from the Bible, Jesus is standing with his friends in a clearing on a hilltop. The Mediterranean air is crisp and dry. This wouldn't be such a big deal if Jesus hadn't just risen from the dead. Now he's standing in their midst alive. In Matthew 28:17, we see the reaction of his disciples. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Some doubted. That's significant. The resurrected Jesus is now physically standing before them, and some are still in doubt. That is fascinating to me, but it gets even better. In his very next statement, Jesus still commissions them. To believers and doubters alike, he says, go and make disciples. On that hilltop, alongside the risen Jesus, the believers and the doubters both belonged. This story provokes us to open up to the best news in the universe. We are all invited to belong to something bigger and more beautiful than we dare to dream. And I just think that's so significant to me, because I really feel like you don't start with deconstruction, you start with doubt. And then the doubt festers and it grows, and then the deconstruction begins. I think if we were to capture more young people in that stage of doubt and say, hey, there is still a home for you here. Like, there is still grace for you here. Like, hey, there are mentors who are willing to like walk with you. I was literally talking to a young person at a church in Oklahoma City, and he went through a whole doubt deconstruction thing, but he's still in the faith. And I said, what was it for you that made that possible? And he said, I had a good youth pastor. And that youth pastor didn't push me away or make me feel bad for my doubts. He actually took the time to reason with me through all of the stuff I was going through. And he didn't make me feel bad. And he didn't act like he had all the answers, but he was patient, and he told me what he believed, and he gave me time and space to process it and think about it. And God spoke to me through that, and I'm still here, and I don't believe all the same, little theological things I did about I've changed in some of my theological leanings on the minor things, but on the major things, I'm still with Jesus. I still believe, and I've shifted in some areas, but it was because of that person loving me through that process that I'm still here. And I think we need to remember how much we can make a difference by having that heart of Christ that is loving and patient and kind, and just invites people, hey, ask, seek, and knock.
That's kind of what we're wanting, right? Is we want that, experience for everyone. Like, oh, I had a youth pastor did this, grace, patience, gave me room. Yeah. But really what we're saying is that youth pastor let Jesus shine through him, because if Jesus was on the scene, like when he was on the scene at his resurrection, where you had doubters and believers and worshipers all in the same place, exactly what you're saying, Aaron. He gave room for people to be who they were. And I think the resurrection of Jesus, that moment, through history, and even in that moment, from that moment and through history, thousands have doubted, studied it. But again, I think of like Lee Strobel, the famed atheist, came to the conclusion Jesus rose from the grave. He didn't start there, but he arrived at it with the witnessed accounts of others. And that's our heart, is like, hey, it's okay if you kind of got in a boat, left the shore, and started rowing away for a bit, but come back to the shore where Jesus is, man, because he is real. Sorry for your, those moments, but man, it's okay. Come to the cross, come to Jesus, and start afresh. Man. Forget what is behind, in one sense.
I mean, do you remember? Just so beautiful. Like what that just triggered this memory of. Remember, how does Jesus respond to Peter? Because remember, like Jesus doesn't see Peter, and then he has that doubt where it's like, I'm denying Christ 3 times. And then Jesus dies. Like, imagine denying Jesus 3 times, and then he's crucified. And like the last time you saw him was when you're being let out and he's being beaten and bruised and tried falsely. And then they make eye contact, and Peter just goes and weeps. And then what happens? Like, Jesus resurrects, but then even after seeing the risen Jesus, Peter's like depressed. Like he goes out and he's like, I don't know if I can be like a leader in the church anymore. I'm just going to go back to my fishing business. And he's just on the boat.
And let's tag team here. So he's out on the boat,
right?
And he sees something on the shore. There's like a flicker of a flame. And it's like, there's some guy on the shore that, and just to kind of tag team with you, you get the blurry view of Jesus. I mean, it's cool, really, when you think about what we're talking about. Like this blurry view of this guy that is like, just warm and loving and making fish by the fire. It's this perfect scene. And like, he has the thing that you're going after. I've never preached that before. I'm just thinking it now. Like, you're out there trying to get fish unsuccessfully. There's Jesus just holding the thing you're chasing after.
Yeah.
The vision gets clearer, and all of a sudden, oh my goodness, this thing you've been chasing for all along. Not only is the provision there, the fish, but there's Jesus on the shore. So guys, could it be that even that rowboat picture that you push away, but man, he wants you to come back and see him more clearly on the shore. And then when Peter realizes it, take it from here, bro, he dives in the water, right?
Yeah, he dives in the water. He's like, oh, Jesus, I got to get to him. And then he shows up, and Jesus is there, and he's got breakfast. And he's like, Jesus, I invite you to the table.
For doubting, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and he's not like, yeah, hey Peter, I'm here to rub it in your face. Let's
Yeah.
have a little sit down meeting, Peter. It's like, no, welcome to the feast of love,
Totally.
Peter. And then what happens
I
in
love it.
that feast? They're sitting there, and it's like, Peter, do you love me? Yeah, Lord, of
That's
course
great.
I do. And like Peter's probably thinking, like, oh, I know why Jesus is asking this, because I denied him 3 times, like while he
Yeah.
was being beaten. And Jesus is like, do you love me? And Peter's like probably feeling even more guilty, like, yeah, Lord, I mean, you know I love you, of course. And then the response is like, hey, Peter, like, if you love me, feed my sheep. And he's not saying to Peter, like, hey, get back to work. He's saying, Peter, I'm restoring your calling. Like, I'm calling you
Yeah.
back to, like, you think you're done. You think that you messed up so big
Yeah.
that you can't come back and serve me. But I'm saying, Peter, like, no, I'm giving this back to you. Like, you're called. Go and feed my sheep. Go and love people. Go and point people to Christ. So yeah, I just think
love
that's a
that,
word.
man. I
That's a
just
word.
love
You
the
know?
idea that when we come back to Christ, we're not coming back to a list. We're
Yeah.
coming back to his love. We don't come back to a
Mhm.
list of, well, you did doubt me there and you doubted me. You stopped going to church and you weren't doing this anymore. And you weren't. We just come
Right.
back to, hey, do you love me? And that's what Jesus wants to do. Maybe with someone watching this section right here. It's just, they're like, I don't know if I could come back because of this church and that. Hold on. Put all church Christians aside for a second and just deal with Christ. And he's like, this is about love. I love you. I've never stopped loving you.
Yeah, because the reality is, like, the whole class we've been doing right now has been talking about how to help young people through doubt and deconstruction. The reality is that, like, church leaders go through doubt and deconstruction. I know people who used to be youth pastors and now they're agnostic. So I think this is a word for maybe somebody listening. Like, you might be burnt out and struggling and you've got doubts, and Jesus is saying to you, like, hey, just come back. Like, just come join me on the shore. Let's eat together. Let's talk together.
Totally.
Let me restore your calling. Let me bring you back to what you're called to do. Like, here's, you know, the holes in the hands, the wounds in the side. He's pulling us up when we're sinking. I just wanted this lesson to be all about the biblical responses we see to doubters from Jesus. And it's just consistently this heart of love. So thanks for listening, everybody. Joel, thanks for being here, bro. I really appreciate it. And thanks for watching the conference online. And we'll have all this and more in the archives. So feel free to check that out. But I'm so excited. I go back home to Oklahoma tomorrow, get to see my son. I'm so tired. I can't wait. It's going to be the best. So, yeah.
Love you, man. It's always great working with you. And anybody out there watching Good Lion Podcast, love everything this guy does. So please join up, sign up, subscribe. Just a great man of God.
Goodlion.org. I'll throw it up one more time. Yeah, you can find all the stuff that we've done over the last 4 years in our ministry is there. And we're doing more. So check it out. Joel, love you, man.
Take care,
I'll
man.
talk to you later.
God bless.